My name is Olivia Hayes. I am 28 years old, and I live in Hartford, Connecticut. For almost my entire life, my father looked at me like I was a breathing mistake. He said my blonde hair and blue eyes could not possibly belong to the Hayes family, where everyone had brown hair, brown eyes, and the same familiar face. He did not always call me proof of my mother's affair out loud, but in every look he gave me, I knew that was what he believed. Then 6 weeks before my wedding, he placed a sheet of paper on the dinner table and said, "If you want me to walk you down the aisle, prove that you are my daughter." If you have ever been doubted by your own family so deeply that you had to prove you deserve to exist among them, comment number 1. That evening was Sunday dinner at my parents' house in Fairfield. The 6-bedroom Tudor-style home stood in the middle of a quiet neighborhood with a dining room that always felt cold. My father, Richard Hayes, liked to remind everyone that he had built everything with his own hands. The engineering company, the Rolex on his wrist, the oak dining table, all of it was proof of the success he wanted people to see. But inside that house, my mother, Margaret, lived like someone always waiting to be sentenced. She sat beside me, gripping her napkin tightly. My older brother, Ethan, kept his head lowered over his plate. My grandmother, Beatrice, sat at the far end of the table, her eyes so cold as she looked at my father that I felt she had already guessed something was going to happen that night. Richard cleared his throat. No one spoke after that. "I will not be attending your wedding, Olivia," he said. My mother froze. "Richard, please don't do this tonight." He did not look at her. He simply pulled a folded sheet of paper from the pocket of his suit jacket and pushed it toward me. It was a consent form for a paternity test. His name had already been signed. "I have been waiting a long time for this day," he said. "I will not walk another man's daughter down the aisle. You have 6 weeks. Take the test. Reveal the results in front of the family. If you are mine, I will apologize. But we both know what the result will say." I looked down at the paper. The black words on the white page blurred not because I was crying, but because I realized this was not a sudden burst of anger. This was a sentence he had been preparing for 28 years. My mother started crying. Ethan still said nothing. My grandmother set her teacup down on the saucer, the sound sharp and dry. And I just looked at my father for a long time. I did not sign it. I did not leave either. I simply folded the paper, placed it beside my glass of water, and said, "Thank you for reminding me, Richard. I won't forget tonight." He smiled, believing he had just backed me into a corner. But he did not know that the very paper he had placed in front of me would unlock a secret far more horrifying than any accusation he had ever made. I learned very early that in the Hayes household love was not divided equally. It was measured by resemblance. Ethan looked like my father, from the way he walked to the color of his eyes, to the way he frowned when he was thinking. So he was always called the pride of the family. As for me, the older I grew, the brighter my blonde hair became, the clearer my blue eyes looked, and the more my presence turned into a thorn in Richard's side. When I was 7, I understood for the first time why my mother often cried behind her bedroom door. That night I woke up thirsty. As I walked past the hallway, I heard my father speaking very softly, but every word was sharp as a blade. "Look at her, Margaret. Blonde hair, blue eyes. Are you really asking me to believe she is mine?" My mother answered in a choked voice, "I have never betrayed you." "Then where did she come from?" I stood frozen outside the door, my small hands still holding a pink plastic cup. That was the first time I understood I was not just a child. In my father's eyes, I was a question he did not want to solve because he had already chosen the answer for himself. After that night, I began noticing things I had never understood before. When Ethan spilled juice on the carpet, my father only sighed and said children were like that. When I broke a glass in the kitchen, he looked at my mother and said, "Bad blood cannot stay hidden for long." I did not fully understand the sentence, but I understood the way my mother lowered her eyes. I understood how she quietly knelt to pick up every shard of glass as if she were the one who had done something wrong. When I was 12, I wanted to join the school volleyball team. I brought the permission slip home and placed it on my father's desk, with the nervous hope of a child who still wanted her father to see her. He read it, then pushed the paper back. "I don't invest my time in another man's child," he said. That same week, Ethan got a new baseball bat, new shoes, and even a sports bag embroidered with his name. I stood in the store watching my father adjust Ethan's cap while my mother squeezed my hand gently as if apologizing on behalf of a man who never knew how deeply he had hurt anyone. If you know what it feels like to be compared inside your own home, comment "I understand." By the time I was 18, that distance was no longer about small gifts. Ethan was accepted into Boston University, and my father paid for everything: his tuition, housing, meals, even a monthly allowance. When I told him I had been accepted into nursing school, he only sat behind the dinner table and did not even look up. "Your real father can pay for you." I remember my mother dropping her spoon onto the plate. The sound was small, but inside me it felt like something had just broken. I stopped asking after that. I took out loans. I worked nights at a diner washing glasses, until my hands blistered falling asleep on the bus between shifts. 6 years later, I graduated with $60,000 in debt and a degree I had earned on my own. On the day I wore my graduation gown, my mother stood in the crowd and cried. My father did not come. But that was not what hurt me the most. What hurt me the most was that I began to understand that every time Richard looked at me with suspicion, I was not the one truly being sentenced. My mother was. I used to think I was the one who suffered the most in that house. Only much later did I understand that I was just the wound Richard used to stab my mother. And my mother had to live every day with that blade buried in her chest, protecting me while also trying to prove a truth that should never have needed proving. Margaret Hayes had once been a beautiful woman. In old photographs, she stood by the shore in Newport, her brown hair loosely tied back her eyes, bright her smile confident. She had studied English literature. She had once dreamed of opening a small bookstore, but after she married my father, those dreams were slowly folded away like pages no one ever read again. Richard did not leave bruises on her arms. He only left questions. One question at the dinner table, one question in the car, one question in front of relatives. "Who did you see today? Why did you need to be out for so long? Olivia looks less and less like anyone in this family. Don't you see that?" Every question was spoken in a calm voice, even a polite one. And that was what made it more cruel. Outsiders only saw a successful husband, a strict father, a family living in a beautiful house in Fairfield. They did not see my mother standing in the bathroom at midnight turning on the faucet so no one would hear her cry. When I was 16, I found her sitting in the car outside the grocery store for almost an hour without going in. I tapped gently on the window. She startled, quickly wiped her tears, and said she was just tired. But on the passenger seat was a receipt for anxiety medication. I did not ask. By that age, I already understood that some pain is hidden, because once it is spoken aloud, people no longer know how to keep living. The breaking point came when I was 23. My grandmother Beatrice called me at 2 in the morning, and for the first time, her voice had lost its steadiness. My mother had been found in the bathroom with an opened bottle of sleeping pills. The ambulance arrived in time. The doctor said that if they had been even a little later, we could have lost her. Richard did not apologize. He only stood in the hospital hallway, his arms crossed, his face cold as stone, and said to my grandmother, if she had nothing to hide, she would not be this weak. That sentence made me look at him differently. Before then, I still hoped that one day my father would understand. After that night, I understood he did not want to understand. He needed my mother to be guilty, because if she was innocent, then all his cruelty would have no reason left to exist. From then on, I began keeping every document: birth certificates, hospital records. The warning my grandmother had given me years earlier suddenly echoed in my mind. One day, you will need to prove the truth. Back then, I did not know that the truth would not only save my mother from an accusation, it would also tear apart the foundation of the family we thought we had been standing on. 2 weeks after that dinner, Richard turned 60. He held his birthday party at Fairfield Country Club, a place with a golf course stretching toward Long Island Sound and a private banquet room with floor-to-ceiling glass windows. It was exactly the kind of place my father liked to be seen in, not because he needed better food or more expensive wine, but because people there looked at him the way he wanted to be seen. Successful, composed, respectable. I did not want to go. But my mother called me that morning, her voice so small I almost had to press the phone against my ear to hear her. "Can you come, Olivia? I don't want to be there alone." That one sentence was enough to make me change into a dress, put on light makeup, and drive back to Fairfield. Caleb came with me. The entire ride he held my hand, squeezing it gently now and then, as if reminding me that I still had a safe place to return to. I wore a simple black dress. Nothing glamorous, nothing meant to draw attention. I only wanted to survive 2 hours and leave. But I had underestimated Richard. At first, the party unfolded like every Hayes family gathering. Relatives laughed, just loudly. Enough glasses touched, compliments were exchanged as a matter of politeness. Ethan stood beside my father talking to uncles about finance and stocks. My mother sat near the window, the diamond bracelet on her wrist, sparkling beneath the lights, a gift Richard had once bought after an argument that left her crying for 3 straight days. Halfway through dinner, after his third glass of wine, Richard stood up. Everyone went silent immediately. He had that ability. All he had to do was set down his glass and adjust his sleeve, and the whole room automatically waited for him to speak. "Thank you all for coming," he began. 60 years is no small journey. I am proud of what I have built. My work, my family, my son Ethan. He raised his glass toward Ethan. A few people applauded. Ethan smiled stiffly. Then Richard's eyes moved to me. "I see Olivia is here tonight too." The air in the room changed at once. My mother placed her hand on the edge of the table. Caleb straightened beside me. I looked at my father and saw that familiar smile, cold, thin, with no trace of affection. "I hope you have thought carefully about our conversation," he said. "A decent family needs the truth. Especially before a wedding." A cousin coughed softly. Someone looked down into their wine glass. But no one stopped him. Richard continued, his voice relaxed as if he were telling an amusing story. "There is a kind of bird that lays its eggs in another bird's nest. The young bird grows up in a nest that does not belong to it. Beautiful, perhaps even very beautiful. But it is still not blood of that nest." My mother's face went pale. I saw tears fall onto her hands. In that moment, something inside me went cold. I was no longer shaking. I was no longer hurting in the old way. There was only a frightening calm. I stood up. The whole room turned to look at me. Caleb stood up too, but I lightly touched his hand, signaling that this time I needed to speak for myself. "Thank you for reminding me, Richard," I said. "I won't forget tonight." I turned to my mother. "Mom, let's step outside for some air." She looked at me like a drowning woman seeing a hand reaching down for her. Then she stood and placed her hand in mine. We walked out of the banquet room, past curious eyes, pitying eyes, even entertained eyes. Behind me, Richard still stood there, probably believing he had just humiliated me in front of the entire family. But he did not know that from that moment on I was no longer trying to prove I belonged in the Hayes family. I only wanted to prove that my mother had never betrayed anyone. And the person who helped me open the first door was my grandmother Beatrice. The air outside the country club was colder than I expected. Wind blew in from Long Island Sound, sweeping across the grass and carrying the faint scent of salt and damp earth. My mother stood beside a flower bed, one hand pressed to her chest, the other still gripping mine tightly, as if she were afraid that if she let go she would fall into some deep place, she could never climb out of. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I turned to look at her. "You're not the one who needs to apologize." She shook her head. "I let you suffer for too long. I kept thinking that if I stayed quiet one day, he would get tired of his own suspicion. But I was wrong." Before I could answer, the sound of heels clicked behind us. My grandmother Beatrice was walking quickly toward us. At 78, she still carried herself with a straight back, a lifted chin, and eyes sharp enough to cut through any lie. But that night, beneath her familiar toughness, I saw words. "Olivia," she said. "There is something I need to tell you." My mother looked up sharply. "Mom, don't." Those two words alone were enough to make my heart sink. I looked from my mother to my grandmother. "What do you two know?" Beatrice was silent for a few seconds, then glanced toward the banquet room door where laughter and the clinking of glasses still drifted out. She led us to a stone bench, overlooking the golf course as dusk settled over it. "The night you were born at St. Mary's Hospital," she began, lowering her voice. Something was not right. My mother closed her eyes. "Your grandfather and I were there," Beatrice continued. "A nurse brought you into the room for Margaret to see. But the nurse was panicked. Her hands were shaking. She handed you to your mother too quickly, then almost ran out." Goosebumps rose along my arms. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" "I tried to ask," she said. "I called the hospital. I asked to see the records. They told me everything was normal, that there was nothing to check. But I did not believe them." She opened her purse and took out a carefully folded sheet of paper yellowed with age. "Before they sealed the records, I managed to make a copy. I took it from her. On the paper, my time of birth was listed as 11. Sedimentaridesit P. M. My mother stared at that number as if she were staring at a crack opening in the ground. "That's not right," she said. "I gave birth to you at 11. Ushaba." I remember it clearly because the doctor joked that you had almost been born on the edge of leap day. 11 minutes. Only 11 minutes, and yet suddenly, it felt like a gap wide enough to swallow my entire life. Beatrice placed a hand on my shoulder. The head nurse that night was Ruth Bennett. I found her address. I tightened my grip on the paper. Inside the banquet room, my father was still enjoying his small victory. Out here, for the first time in my life, I understood that the real story might not have started with my mother's betrayal. It may have started in a hospital room during 11 minutes no one had ever been willing to explain. The next morning, I walked into the Gene Trust office in Hartford with 3 DNA samples. Mine was a cheek swab. My mother's was voluntary. She had given it to me the night before, her hands still shaking but her eyes calmer than I had ever seen them. "No matter what the result says," she told me, "you are still my daughter." Richard's sample was different. I took a few strands of hair from the comb he kept in the guest bathroom. The bathroom I had walked past through so many holidays like a stranger, temporarily allowed inside her own family. I did not feel guilty. After 28 years of being turned into his evidence against my mother, I only wanted the real evidence. Dr. Elena Reyes explained that the results could be used in court if necessary. I paid extra for expedited processing. When I walked out of the building, I stood in the sun for a long time, feeling as if I had just placed my entire life on a cold table, waiting for someone else to read out the truth. 3 weeks later, the email arrived at 9. Sedimentaridesit P. M. Caleb was in Boston, and I was sitting alone in my small apartment with a half-eaten bowl of salad in front of me. The subject line was painfully plain. "Your DNA analysis results." I entered my password, verified my identity, opened the file. The first line did not shock me as much as I thought it would. "Olivia Hayes has no biological relationship to Richard Hayes." I closed my eyes. For one brief moment, I saw myself at 7 years old in the hallway at 12, with the volleyball permission slip pushed back toward me at 18. Hearing your real father can pay for your education. Richard had been right in the smallest, cruelest way. I was not his biological daughter. But then I read the second line. Olivia Hayes has no biological relationship to Margaret Hayes. The room seemed to lose all its air. I read it again. Once. Twice. 3 times. The words remained there cold and merciless. Not my father's child. Not my mother's child either. I called Gene Trust's emergency support line and asked them to check again. Could the samples have been mixed up? Could there have been contamination? Could it be a system error, doctor? Reyes called me back 20 minutes later. Her voice was very gentle, but every word fell like stone. There was no error, Ms. Hayes. The results are clear. You have no biological relationship to either of the 2 tested individuals. I sat down on the kitchen floor, my back against the cabinet, the phone slipping from my hand. For 28 years, Richard had called my mother a traitor. This result proved she had not betrayed him in the way he believed. But it also opened a far more terrifying question. If my mother had truly given birth to me, why did the DNA say she was not my mother? The next morning I drove to Fairfield after confirming Richard was playing golf. My mother was sitting in the sunroom in a robe with a cup of cold Earl Grey tea in front of her. I handed her my phone. She read for a long time. Then her face went white. No, she whispered. I gave birth to you. I was in labor for 14 hours. I heard you cry. Olivia, I held you. Ihilhahen. I believe you. She looked up, tears spilling down her face. Then what happened? I looked at her, and for the first time I said aloud, the thing we were both afraid of. Someone switched me at the hospital. Ruth Bennett's message came after 5 unanswered calls. Just one short line. Thursday, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Riverside Diner in Bridgeport. Come alone. I stared at my phone screen. Caleb told me I should not go by myself, but I understood why Ruth had asked for that. This woman had stayed silent for 28 years. If I wanted her to speak, I had to make her feel that this was not an ambush. Riverside Diner sat at the end of an old road, its red sign faded, its glass door carrying the smell of burnt coffee and frying oil. Ruth was sitting in the most hidden corner, her back against the wall. She looked about 72 with silver hair pinned into a low bun, and both hands wrapped tightly around a coffee cup. When I walked over, she looked up. The moment she saw me, her lips trembled. You look like her, Ruth said. I stopped. Who? Claire Lawson, she answered, her voice so soft it almost disappeared beneath the sound of spoons tapping against cups. Your biological mother. The words biological mother tightened around my chest. I sat down across from her and tried to keep my voice steady. So you know what happened? Ruth closed her eyes. A tear slipped down the wrinkles on her cheek. I have known since that night. She took out a small notebook with worn corners. The pages had yellowed and the ink had faded, but the writing was still readable. This is my shift log, she said. I kept it because I was afraid that one day my conscience would no longer let me breathe. I looked down at the page she had already opened. 11:47 at night. First baby girl daughter of Margaret Hayes, healthy. 11:58 at night. Second baby girl daughter of Claire Lawson, healthy. 32 minutes after midnight. Trainee nurse mixed up the 2 babies after bath time. 2:15 in the morning. Mistake discovered. 2:45 in the morning. Hospital administration decided to alter the records and not switch the babies back. All involved staff signed confidentiality agreements. I read each line feeling as if someone were pulling the floor out from under me. They knew, I whispered. They knew that very night. Ruth nodded, her shoulders trembling. They said switching the babies back would destroy both mothers. They said both women had already held their daughters, already named them. They said silence would cause the least pain. No, I said. It caused the least trouble for the hospital. She lowered her head. Yes. And I was too cowardly to stand against them. If you also believe a hidden truth can be even crueler than the original mistake comment truth. I asked about the other baby. Ruth took a printed social media profile from an envelope. On it was a woman my age, with brown hair, brown eyes, and a dimpled smile that looked like Ethan's. Her name is Hannah Lawson, Ruth said. She lives in Springfield, Massachusetts. And Olivia, she is Margaret and Richard Hayes' biological daughter. I stared at that photo, my heart beating so hard it hurt. Somewhere out there, a woman had lived, the life I might have lived. And I had spent 28 years growing up in a house that did not share my blood, but still left every wound on me. When I left the diner, Ruth called after me. I'm sorry. I stopped at the door, but I did not turn around. Apologized to my mother in front of the 60 people who heard her be sentenced. This time, I was no longer only searching for the truth. I was preparing to bring it into the light. That night, I sat in front of my laptop for nearly 3 hours staring at Hannah Lawson's profile and not knowing what to call her. A stranger? A lost sister? My mother's biological daughter? Or the person who carried the face Richard had always wanted to see in me? Hannah was an elementary school teacher in Springfield, Massachusetts. In her profile picture, she stood in front of a colorful alphabet board with shoulder-length brown hair, warm brown eyes, and a dimple on the left side of her smile. If you placed her beside Ethan, no one would need DNA to see they shared the same blood. And if you placed me beside Claire Lawson, the woman Ruth had called my biological mother, maybe I would finally find the answer I had been missing my entire life. I wrote a message to Hannah 17 times, then deleted it. There is no gentle way to tell someone that her life began with a hidden mistake. In the end, I only wrote the truth. I told her my name was Olivia Hayes. I told her we were born on the same night at St. Mary's Hospital, only 11 minutes apart. I told her my DNA results showed that I was not the biological child of the parents who raised me. I told her a former nurse had confirmed that 2 babies were switched after bath time, and that I believed she was the biological daughter of Margaret and Richard Hayes. I left my phone number, then shut the laptop as if one more second of looking at the screen would drain all the courage from me. 24 hours later, my phone rang. Is this Olivia? The voice on the other end trembled slightly. Hannah. She was silent for a long time. Then I heard her inhale, as if she were trying to keep herself from breaking apart. All my life, people said I didn't look like my parents. My dad used to joke that maybe the hospital had given them the wrong baby. We all laughed. I never thought the joke was true. We talked for more than 3 hours. Sometimes we both went quiet, not because there was nothing left to say, but because every sentence felt too heavy. Hannah told me her mother Claire had blonde hair and blue eyes like mine. Her father had died of cancer 3 years earlier before he ever had the chance to know the truth. I told her about Margaret, about the mother who had raised me with all the love she had, and about Richard, the man who had used my differences to punish her for 28 years. By the end of the call, Hannah agreed to take a DNA test with Margaret and Richard. The results would come in 10 days. Before she hung up, she asked me a question that made my throat close. If all of this is true, would your mother want to meet me? I looked out the window where Hartford was sinking into pale yellow light. Yes, I said. My mother has been waiting for you for 28 years, even though she didn't know who she was waiting for. Before science confirmed it, I already knew. Hannah was not just a name in a file. She was the missing piece taken from my mother. And her appearance would leave Richard with nowhere left to hide behind his own suspicion. The 10 days waiting for Hannah's DNA results were the longest 10 days of my life. I still went to work at the hospital. I still changed bandages for patients. I still answered my coworkers with normal sentences. but inside me everything felt as if it were standing in front of a locked door. Once that door opened, no one in the Hayes family would ever be able to return to their old position. Richard did not wait in silence. He found out I had taken a DNA test because Ethan accidentally saw the confirmation email on my mother's phone when he visited her. An hour later, Richard called me. The moment I answered, he laughed, his voice full of victory. "So what did the results say, Olivia? I was right, wasn't I?" I did not answer immediately. Not because I was afraid, but because in those few seconds I realized the truth was too big to throw into a phone call like some small comeback. My silence was enough for him to understand it the way he wanted to. "I knew it," he said. 28 years. Finally, everyone will see I was not crazy. "Richard, you don't know the whole story." "Of course I do. You are not my daughter. Margaret betrayed me. Everything else is just the two of you trying to make excuses." He hung up before I could tell him that my mother had never betrayed anyone. An hour later, he sent an email to the relatives, almost the same list as before. He wrote that the truth was finally coming out, that he would not be turned into a cruel man just because he had dared to doubt. He did not have the full result, but that did not stop him from acting like he had already won. This time I did not cry. I printed everything out. My DNA report. Photos of Ruth's shift log. The notarized statement she had agreed to sign after many sleepless nights. The copy of the birth record listing my time of birth as 11:47 at night. My mother's note about the time she clearly remembered as 11:58 at night. Everything was sorted into separate folders on the living room table. Caleb sat across from me, worry in his eyes. "Are you sure you want to do this? At the engagement party?" I looked at the wedding dress hanging in the bedroom. 6 weeks earlier, all I had wanted was to walk down the aisle like a normal bride. Now I understood that my wedding day could not begin with a lie buried under the rug. "He humiliated my mother in front of the family," I said. "He sent emails to everyone. He called me a child who did not belong in its own nest. If the shame was public, then the truth has to be public too." 2 days before the engagement party, Hannah's results arrived. Hannah Lawson had a 99.97% biological relationship with Richard Hayes. Hannah Lawson had a 99.98% biological relationship with Margaret Hayes. I stared at those numbers for a long time. They did not just confirm that two babies had been switched. They pulled my mother's real daughter out of the darkness. That night I called Hannah. She was silent for almost a full minute after I read the results to her. Then she said, "I want to meet them." "You will," I replied. "But first there is a room that needs to hear the truth." And this time Richard would not get to choose the story for us anymore. My engagement party was held at Whitmore Manor, my grandmother Beatrice's old house on the outskirts of Fairfield. Golden string lights hung between the old oak trees and white flowers covered the entrance. From the outside, everything looked as gentle as a dream. But to me, it was a trial. 60 people were there, including relatives from both sides, close friends, and almost everyone who had received Richard's email. I wore a dark blue dress with my phone in my hand holding the presentation. Caleb stood beside me close enough for me to know I was not alone. My mother arrived with my grandmother. She wore a cream-colored dress. Her eyes were still red, but her back was straighter than it had been in years. Richard arrived late, wearing a black suit with a confident smile, as if this was his stage. Ethan walked beside him, his face tense. I knew he had shown our father part of the result. In the corner of the room, Ruth Bennett sat quietly with a glass of water. Behind the side door, Hannah was waiting. That moment needed to happen only after the truth had been placed where it belonged. Halfway through the party, Richard asked for the microphone. The room fell silent. He stepped onto the small platform and smiled. "First, I want to congratulate Caleb," he said. "You are a brave man for marrying into this family." A few uncomfortable laughs moved through the room. But everyone knows why I really wanted to speak tonight, Richard continued. I asked Olivia to take a DNA test. Just as I expected, the result shows that she has no biological relationship to me. Whispers spread across the room. My mother closed her eyes. Richard lifted the paper in his hand. Not only that, he said, "She is not Margaret's biological child either." Richard turned toward my mother, his face full of judgment. "Margaret, what lie are you planning to tell now?" I stepped onto the platform. "You are partly right, Richard," I said, taking the microphone from his hand. "The DNA result proves that I am not your biological daughter. It also proves that I am not my mother's biological daughter." The corner of his mouth lifted. But that smile only lived for a few more seconds. "But not because my mother betrayed you." I tapped my phone. The large screen on the wall lit up with the first DNA report. Then I switched to the photo of Ruth's shift log. On the night of March 15th, 1997, at St. Mary's Hospital, 2 baby girls were born 11 minutes apart. One was the daughter of Margaret and Richard Hayes. One was the daughter of Claire Lawson. After bath time, a trainee nurse mixed up the 2 babies. The hospital discovered the mistake, but they changed the records and forced the staff to stay silent. The whole room went still. If you are waiting for the moment when the truth finally gives justice back to the person who was wrongfully accused, comment "Justice." I looked toward the corner of the room. This is Ruth Bennett, the head nurse that night. Ruth stood up, her hands shaking, but her voice clear. "I was there. Margaret Hayes never betrayed her husband. The hospital covered up its mistake. I am sorry I stayed silent for so long." Richard stepped back, half a step. All the color drained from his face. I turned toward the side door. "And this is the person you spent your whole life searching for in the wrong place, through the wrong suspicion." Hannah walked in. Brown hair. Brown eyes. A dimple, like Richard's. Facial features so similar to Ethan's that no one in the room needed another explanation. But I still put the final result on the screen. Hannah Lawson has a 99.97% biological relationship with Richard Hayes and a 99.98% biological relationship with Margaret Hayes. I said, "She is their biological daughter." A champagne glass fell to the floor and shattered. Ethan covered his mouth with his hand. My mother looked at Hannah as if a missing piece of her soul had just returned. And Richard stood frozen, his eyes locked on the girl who carried his blood. I stepped closer to him. "You wanted science, Richard. This is science. You wanted it public. This is public. For 28 years you punished my mother for a sin that never happened. You used me as evidence against her when the truth is that both of us were victims." Richard looked at my mother, then at Hannah, then at me. His knees gave way. Richard was kneeling on the wooden floor of the banquet room, both hands braced against it as if his body no longer had the strength to hold itself up. The man who had once made an entire house stop breathing with a single look could not lift his head in front of 60 people. No one rushed forward to help him up. The silence in that room was not pity. It was a verdict. My mother stepped forward. For 28 years she had lowered her head too many times beneath Richard's accusations. But that night her back was straight, and her voice did not shake. "You were wrong, Richard," she said. "Not just wrong for one day. You were wrong for 28 years. Richard looked up, his eyes red. "Margaret, I didn't know." "You didn't want to know," she replied. There is a very big difference between those two things. I looked at my mother and saw that she no longer resembled the woman who had once cried behind the bathroom door. She did not scream. She did not take revenge. But every word she spoke reclaimed the dignity he had stolen from her. "You owe me an apology in front of every person who ever heard you call me a traitor," she said. "You owe Olivia an apology for turning her childhood into a place for your anger." And you owe Hannah an apology for spending your whole life searching for your daughter through suspicion. Richard tried to stand. It took 3 attempts before he finally managed to grip the edge of the platform. Ethan did not help him. My brother walked toward my mother instead, his voice breaking as he said, "Mom, I'm sorry. I saw what was happening for too long, and I never had the courage to stand up to Dad." My mother hugged Ethan. There was forgiveness in that embrace, but also the exhaustion of someone who had waited far too long for her own child to see her pain. Richard took the microphone, his voice rough and hoarse. "I was wrong. Margaret never betrayed me. I accused her for almost 3 decades. I hurt Olivia, the child I should have protected, even if we did not share blood." He turned toward me. "I cannot give you back your childhood, but I will pay off your student loans. And if you allow it, I want to learn how to become a better man." I looked at him. There was no instant softness in me. Forgiveness is not one sentence, Richard. If you want to make things right, you have to live differently. After that, my mother walked toward Hannah. The girl stood near the door, both a stranger and painfully familiar. My mother gently touched her cheek as if she feared that if she pressed too hard, the truth that had just returned would disappear. "Hello, sweetheart," my mother whispered. "I'm Margaret. I'm sorry it took me so long to find you." Hannah broke down crying. The two of them held each other in the middle of the banquet room, while I stood beside them, feeling my heart being pulled in 2 directions. I had not lost my mother, but from that moment on her heart would have another room inside it for the daughter who had been taken from her. 1 week later, I drove to Springfield to meet Claire Lawson. She opened the door before I could knock. Her blonde hair was streaked with silver, and her blue eyes looked so much like mine that I had to hold on to the door handle. When she hugged me in a kitchen warm with the smell of tea, I understood that the truth did not only take things away. Sometimes it also began to give them back. 8 months after the wedding, the lawsuit against Mary's hospital ended in an out-of-court settlement. Hannah and I were both named in the complaint, not because we wanted to turn pain into money, but because we needed the place that had switched 2 lives to admit what it had hidden. The hospital apologized, changed its newborn identification procedures, and compensated both families. But to me, the number on the paper mattered less than 1 sentence in the public statement. The mistake was discovered on the same night. It happened, but it was not corrected. That sentence gave my mother back something no amount of money could buy. The truth. Margaret and Claire met for the first time at a cafe, halfway between Fairfield and Springfield. I was not there, but my mother told me they sat for more than 3 hours, placing photos of the 2 daughters who had been switched on the table between them. My mother showed Claire pictures of my first day of school, my graduation the day I put on my nurse's uniform. Claire showed my mother pictures of Hannah losing her first tooth standing on a school stage and hugging the dog she had adopted. They cried a lot. But those were not the kind of tears that destroy a person. They were the tears of 2 mothers finally giving the right name to their loss. Richard started therapy. My mother did not return to the house in Fairfield right away. She rented a small apartment near Hartford, bought flowers for the window herself, chose her own curtains, and learned how to wake up without having to guess what her husband would suspect that day. Some marriages do not die from betrayal. They die because one person uses suspicion to suffocate the other for too long. As for me, I married Caleb in my grandmother Beatrice's rose garden. The person who walked me down the aisle was not Richard. It was my mother. She walked beside me in a champagne-colored dress, her hand resting steadily on mine. When we reached the end of the aisle, she whispered, "This time I am bringing you to a place where you are loved." I did not forgive Richard immediately. Maybe I still have not fully done it. But I gave him one small chance, not because he deserved it, but because I did not want my life to remain tied to his bitterness. Now in my new apartment in Hartford, I hang 3 photographs side by side. One with Margaret. One with Claire. One with Hannah, the woman who once lived the life that might have been mine, but who eventually helped me understand that family is not made by blood alone. Blood can tell the truth, but love decides who stays, who protects you, and who deserves to be called home.